So another thing that Stephen Boyce does in the debate is he looks into the Ethiopic.
You've made statements about the Ethiopic or the Ge'ez language supporting this from the 1549. And you wrote that in your book, and I think you took a picture of Hoskier's citation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Walton's polyglot.
Right. I have a connection at the Smithsonian who connected me with one of the leading professionals in the world in the Ge'ez language, Dr. Notsnitzen, and I hope I just did justice to his name because I don't know how to pronounce German names. And what he did for me, Nick, and I'll pull this up for us, is he translated the Ethiopic out of the polyglot itself. And what you said was true in one place. In your argument, you say that who will be is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that. I'd like to state this. He made statements that these transmissions into the Ethiopic were very poorly done, a lot of misspellings and so forth. But I noticed that there was something missing even in the Ethiopic that was translated in the Latin. There is who is and who will be, but there is no who was. The Triadic Declaration is not even in the Ethiopic. And it's not based on anything like what we're suggesting Beza said about Jehovah. In fact, the word over here is actually God. Though it is a sacred name, Theos would be a sacred name, it is not Jehovah name Ankuria. So
he claimed that the Ethiopic says God at Revelation 16:5 and not Lord. And so what I did is I studied through this and I went to one of the most common verses which says Lord in it, which is in Matthew chapter 7, where it says, many will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we cast out demons in your name, prophesy in your name, etc. And so I looked at those two words, and it's exactly the same as what's in Revelation 16:5. And so that is basically nothing. And so one of the things is with doing these videos is there's almost nothing that Stephen Boyce has said against my position, almost absolutely nothing. And so he's raised some side issues, but there was nothing in the debate that was like, you're wrong here.
And it's not based on anything like what we're suggesting Beza said about Jehovah. In fact, the word over here is actually God. Though it is a sacred name, Theos would be a sacred name, it is not Jehovah name Ankuria. So another thing that Stephen Boyce basically claimed was that the Triadic Declaration is not in the Ethiopic. And what you said was true in one place. In your argument, you say that who will be is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that. I'd like to state this. He made statements that these transmissions into the Ethiopic were very poorly done, a lot of misspellings and so forth. But I noticed that there was something missing even in the Ethiopic that was translated in the Latin. There is who is and who will be, but there is no who was. The Triadic Declaration is not even in the Ethiopic.
And so I went through a lot of my writings and I went through everything that I had, and I couldn't find one place where I had actually claimed that the Ethiopic had the Triadic Declaration of which was and is and shall be. I clearly stated that it had the future form of shall be, and that's what I was focusing on. And so in my book, and I've given Stephen my book, or a rough draft of my book, in PDF, and so he could have easily have gone through and seen that, at times, things like I am, say in the Coverdale Bible, was I shall be what I shall be. And so some Bible translations have I was that I was. Some have I am that I am. And so these three aspects, the past, the present, and the future, when we're looking at Bible translations, as I mentioned in the debate, the Arabic just says the eternal in Revelation 16:5. And so obviously that encompasses the past, the present, and the future. And so he sort of seemed to have had put me against the wall there, and I thought, well, I'm not highly academic. I sometimes blunder my words, and I say the wrong things. And so, sometimes, like the other day, I was debating that Jesus died on a Thursday, and I actually, in the middle of this debate, I basically said Jesus died on a Friday, just because I had Friday on my mind, And so I can make mistakes, but so in the debate, he sort of put me on the spot with this thing of, you're sort of claiming this, that it's a Triadic Declaration, but it's not. It's only the final form. And I'm like, well, I've actually never claimed that, but I was sort of like, well, if I have done that, sorry, I'm not perfect, and, I'm not a scholar, and, all the rest of it. But when I look back, I went back through all my writings, and I went back through, tons of Facebook, chats and things like that, and I couldn't find anywhere where I'd actually said this. Where I've probably said in the past, the Ethiopic has the Triadic Declaration, but then I probably should be a little bit more careful and say, well, the Ethiopic has the final part of the Triadic Declaration shall be, which is usually the one that everyone's arguing about. And so I was sort of apologising just in case, And so it's another thing that Stephen Boyce has brought up, which is nothing. It's just an absolute nothing. And in my book, I don't claim that the Ethiopic is the Triadic Declaration. I claim that the Ethiopic has the future part of it.
And what you said was true. In one place, in your argument, you say that who will be, is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that. But I noticed that there was something missing even in the Ethiopic that was translated in the Latin. There is who is and who will be, but there is no who was. The Triadic Declaration's not even in the Ethiopic.
So there's another thing that Stephen Boyce brings up, which is that the Ethiopic has been mistranslated. Now, we can see that there's many poor translations of the Bible out there, but is it mistranslated here in Revelation 16:5? And so it's not. When we go through it, he agrees with what I've written in my book. The scholar at the Smithsonian agreed. And so while he might say that there's mistranslations in the Ethiopic, I turn around and just say, well, is it here? No, it's not. So why even bring that up? Yes.
All right. And the man's name that did the translating and transmitting was Dudley Loftus. He was an Irishman who did the Geese language. And in a book called The Memoirs of the Life and Writings of Reverend Brian Walton, which is the polyglot, a man did this and said this about his work of Ethiopic transmitting and translating. He said the translator of it in the Latin conjectured, and he gives the word there, and he states how inconsistent this is, and basically says the Ethiopic translator must be illiterate and the translation novel when it comes to, and he compares the Syriac. And then Scrivener, who I know you appreciate a lot of Scrivener's work, and I do as well, said this about the translation as well. Walton's polyglot, the New Testament, was reprinted with many faults. An unusually bad Latin translation by Dudley Loftus, from which Mill and his successors derive various readings. So what I did is I got so tired of reading how bad the Latin was, I ended up going to find out from, I have a connection at the Smithsonian who connected me with one of the leading professionals in the world in the Geese language, Dr. Notsnitsen, and I hope I just did justice to his name.
What I've found is Stephen seems to think that these debate points, he's won these debate points. And when I was doing the debate, I was sort of like, what's he bringing up now? It just seemed quite irrelevant. And so I'm not saying that, okay, Revelation 16:5 in the Ethiopic reads exactly like what Beza had in every part of that verse. Sometimes, they might drop off an end or they might drop off a beginning. I'm specifically talking about the Esomenos reading, and that is carried over in the Ethiopic, and that's been admitted by Elijah Hickson on his blog. That's been admitted by Jan Kranz, and that's admitted by Stephen here.
And what you said was true. In one place, in your argument, you say that who will be, is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that.
But I haven't been saying that it's the Triadic Declaration. Now, in Beza's work and other work, I'm like, yeah, that's the Triadic Declaration. And when I look into the Latin, it's got the Triadic Declaration. And when I look at the Ethiopic, it's like, well, it's got the future part of it. Now, I don't read Ethiopic fluently. I have no idea about the alphabet, and neither does Stephen. So he's trusted in scholars. But this scholar has basically sort of pointed to it being God and not Lord. And so it just makes me question this scholar. Just deal with what I'm actually saying. Just deal with what the manuscript itself says. I'm not advocating for every Ethiopic reading, but what I'm saying is it is there. And you have to deal with that. Now, he did touch on Hoskia and what Hoskia said.
You come down here into Hoskier's edition of citations. Here's the translation of Dudley. You are righteous, and then he has Lord here. He mistranslated the Ethiopic. Should have been God. And rectus right here. And then you're right about this part. This right here, Dick shows that this is the Ethiopic in the polyglot. You're right about this right here in your book. That is to be. But what I find interesting down here is Hoskier waited till he got to Kai Ha Hasios and the Holy One. And he cites one of the over here. This is a Coptic manuscript. And then he cites again back up here our polyglot, rectus pro sanctus ut supra. And he's letting us know that rectus replaced or went in place of sanctus, which is Holy One, ut supra. But Hoskier is saying that actually the polyglot supports Kai Ha Hasios, and that the word Holy One has been replaced with a different word, rectus, here. And that's understandable because if we go back to our Ethiopic over here, for some reason we have in transmission righteous and just, which doesn't really make sense to have both there. And so Dudley translated it to rectus instead of sanctus, and Hoskier recognized this should have been this is a replacement for the word Holy One, basically. And so he's saying that actually the polyglot supports Hasios. So really, according to this, the Ethiopic reads the one who is and is to be the Holy One. That's actually the reading in the Ethiopic.
Now he looks down the page. At the bottom of the page, it has another reference. Now this is to do with Hoskia basically pointing out that in some of these manuscripts, the word for righteous or the word just sometimes can be replaced. The word holy can be replaced by these words. That's all it's saying. And so I'm not saying that, Revelation 16:5 in the Ethiopic reads exactly like what Beza had in every part of that verse. Sometimes, they might drop off an end or they might drop off a beginning. I'm specifically talking about the Esomenos reading, and that is carried over in the Ethiopic. So if we examine exactly what Stephen has said so far about the Ethiopic in this debate, he's basically said that the Ethiopic says God, and it doesn't say Lord, but when we examine this claim, we see that it actually does say Lord. So that proves him wrong, and also this scholar at the Smithsonian who translated it God. And so then we look at the second point. He's saying that I've basically claimed that the Ethiopic has the Triadic Declaration in it, which is something that I've never claimed. And I would like for him to prove that I've actually said that. And the third point, he said that the Ethiopic was translated badly into Latin in Walton's polyglot by Loftus. And so, but in this particular place that I'm talking about, it's not mistranslated. So that has nothing to do with the argument anyway. And then the fourth point that he puts forward is that Hoskia says, well, the Ethiopic has the word just in it, which could probably mean holy. And so, as I pointed out in my book, some of these have the Triadic Declaration and afterwards say, and holy, after it as well. And so, none of these four things mean anything. He's actually said nothing. So when you go through the Ethiopic section of the debate, Stephen Boyce has said nothing. All he's done is provide a bad translation of the word Lord, where he says it's God. He accuses Hoskia of getting that wrong as well, and these other issues. And so, but with all this in mind, it's quite interesting to see how he reacted to this just after our debate, when we were chatting in some debate group on Facebook. It's quite interesting to see how he reacted to this. And so in a later chat in a King James only debate group, Stephen basically said that he'd answered my questions, and, you know, he's saying it over and over again sort of thing. But I kept saying, you haven't actually answered my question. He said, the Ethiopic doesn't support your theory. It doesn't have all three. Mistranslations and poor transmission has already been demonstrated to you in that translation of the Ethiopic. And so this is after the debate. Stephen, I'm questioning Stephen and saying, you know, well, what about the Ethiopic? And he's basically saying, I've already proven you wrong on this point. How many times do I have to say it? You're wrong. It doesn't have the Triadic Declaration. And I'm like, I'm not claiming that it has the Triadic Declaration. I'm claiming it has the future part, which is equivalent to a somenos. That's what I'm claiming. So basically, Stephen has set up a straw man here, and he keeps tearing down that straw man. And I'm like, I'm not dealing with that. My book, which I clearly, it's in print. You can read it, you can see it. Yeah, it's been online since 2016. Many people have it. If you go through it, I have not claimed that the Ethiopic has the full Triadic Declaration. I've claimed that it has the future form of it. So basically, Stephen is bunkering down on this and saying that I've claimed that there's these three in the Ethiopic, where I'm not saying that, and I've never said that. So after I said to Stephen that I've never claimed that, he said, Nick Sayers, no, I corrected your theory and you adjusted on the Ethiopic. So he's saying, you know, you changed your view on the Ethiopic in the debate. The Ethiopic has two of the three, so it's not the three that you claim belongs there. Notice he's saying, I'm claiming that it's the three. I also demonstrated that the Ethiopic in Walton's polyglot was horrendous by many accounts. So here we go again. He's just saying it's wrong, but in this point, it's not wrong. And so he's created a straw man argument that he's trying to tear down. So I replied to Stephen, I never actually claimed there was three. Please cite where I ever state that. I apologized in the debate if I've ever done that. But on examination, I haven't. And so Stephen responded and said, Nick Sayers, you claimed it supported your argument. It does not. It does read the same way the TR does. I think he meant it does not read the same way the TR does. On these chats, you can type really fast and mess up. And again, the Ethiopic in the polyglot is unreliable in transmission, as stated in the debate. Scrivener gave the harshest criticism of it. And that's fine. People can be critical of how it's been translated, but is it translated wrong here? It's not. So why is that even an issue? So Stephen Boyce replied and said, it's not a straw man. It doesn't read like the TR, LOL. Hoskia said it supports the reading I defend in his list, and the Ethiopic is a 17th century polyglot. In a 17th century polyglot is a joke that has been criticised for accuracy by one of the fathers of the TR. That's not a straw man. That's a totally separate thing. I'm talking about the 1549 Ethiopic. Okay, the 1549 Ethiopic that's based upon earlier things. It's based upon earlier manuscripts. They have the exact same wording of the last word. We're talking about one word here. We're not talking about the whole entire thing. We're not talking about other parts of the verse. But he's trying to throw all this dust in the air to make this word say something else. And then he's claiming, when I point out that straw man, he's saying it's not a straw man. This is ridiculous. This is in a 1659 polyglot. What's that got to do with anything? And it's like, well, did you even read my book? My whole book was about how there is evidence before Beza. and then what happened after Theodore Beza. And so, he is just jumping all over the place here. So Stephen continued and said, Nick says, you said so in the debate. You even said you may have stated it that way in the past and need to refer to it as supporting is to be, as is the be, but I guess, it's on Facebook, so there's going to be errors in it. Or something to that effect. You have the video to go back to above. It's saying is to be is irrelevant to the fact that it doesn't support your overall argument. What good is it to have only two of the three when you and Beza are saying all three belong? It's a textual variant and a mistranslation somewhere in the tradition of the Ethiopic, one way or another. And so notice he's arguing something I've never claimed. He's just continually arguing it. No matter what I say to Stephen Boyce, he is just trying to, he has his idea that he's brought up in the debate. And I'm like, well, if I've ever said that, I'm sorry about that. Proved myself correct, and he just won't deal with it. And he's saying, well, what's that got to do with anything anyway? This doesn't agree with your ideas anyway. Well, what idea? What, the whole book idea? Or just looking at the Ethiopic? And that's what I was doing in the book. I had a whole concept, but the Ethiopic idea, that doesn't have anything to do with that concept. It's just evidence for a future reading. He's creating a straw man here. It's very easy to see. So then Stephen tries to jump over onto different platforms, and he says, Nick says, no, you've said it supports the TR reading. You never said the Triadic Declaration. And since it doesn't support the Triadic Declaration, there's no reason to use a poorly transmitted 17th century Ethiopic translation to support something Beza did in the 16th century. Notice how bizarre this is. And notice how, if I'm trying to converse with Stephen and just bring out just a simple bit of logic that he's gotten it wrong here, that he's accusing me of something I've never said and never claimed. Now, if he wants to claim that my theories are silly or whatever, that's fine. But what he's doing now is he's conflating the two things. He's conflating the ending of the Ethiopic with the whole concept of the Triadic Declaration. And so obviously my book goes into a whole bunch of different topics. It goes into the Triadic Declaration. It goes into the dodecaglot of Hutta, who has, some of the readings have the past, present, and future. Some just have one word. Some have the two ending words. And I deal with those things specifically. So it's like him just grabbing one of them and saying, look, this doesn't support the Triadic Declaration. Why did you bring it up? And it's like, well, I'm looking at all the evidence, And so to me, this is one of the character flaws that I'm seeing in Stephen. And so I don't want this just to be an ad hom attack, but you've got to see it coming from my perspective. I've written a book on this. He's debating me on it. And he's like, I've won this debate point. I'm like, well, actually, no, you didn't really win the debate point, Stephen. You've actually gotten it wrong. I never claimed that this was the Triadic Declaration. I've said it's the TR reading of Isomenos, not the whole entire TR reading, not the whole verse or anything. I've said it's the reading of Isomenos. So I said to Stephen, I said, you are mistaken about a few things. The Ethiopic is an accurate version made in 1549 in Rome by the translators of the Syriac Bible. I go in depth in my book about Tremellius, and he's linked to Beza here. So, I've got links to all that. Walton's Polyglot in 1657 reprinted the Ethiopic with a Latin version on the side. That Latin version is what Hickson, Scrivener, and other people, and myself, have said that it's roughly done, not the 1549. So when I'm pointing out, okay, the 1549 says this, he's like, yeah, but it's got this bad translation. What? So like 100 years later, someone did a Latin translation of it, and we've all agreed that here it's fine. There's no problems here. Because the guy from the Smithsonian said it, even Stephen Boyce said it, and so what's the issue? Why is he continually saying it's badly translated? the 1549 Ethiopic itself is not wrong. That's how, it's in the Ethiopic. That's what it says. So what I said to Stephen was the 1549 does support the reading of Isomenos. The rough Latin is correct in Revelation 16:5 anyway, as Hickson, Kranz, Hoskier, and many others testify. So it's sort of like, what's your point here? Why are you continually bringing up poor translation and all this other stuff? Stephen said, Nick Sayers, the Ethiopic you used for data was in the London polyglot done by Loftus. I never said it didn't support is to be. I've said just the opposite. So why are you keep bringing this up? What is the point? What point are you making? So then he says it doesn't support your argument for the Triadic. And so I'm not sure where he gets this word Triadic. I've always called it the Triadic. Whether he's gotten that from my book and he's thought that's what it reads, but all through the James White TR discussion and all through our debate, he called it the Tridact, thing. And I've Googled, I've looked for this word, it just doesn't exist. And so, and that's fine, it's just a minor little point. But he says it doesn't support your argument for the I'll just call it Triadic, the Triadic, which was Beza's whole reasoning. You can't say a reading that doesn't read the same supports your reading. That certainly wasn't Beza's reading. I never claimed it was Beza's whole reading. I never claimed anything else about the Ethiopic except that it has the same form of shall be, esomenos. It has that reading. Does it have that reading? You say yes. No one's arguing about that. So okay, then you're arguing a whole different thing than what I've been arguing. You're basically stating a whole different thing. I've never said that this is the whole support for a Triadic Declaration. I've said this is support for a reading where James White said that no one had ever seen that reading before of shall be. But I'm like, okay, well, it's in the Ethiopic, years before, 30 years before Theodore Beza. There it is. And so I'm not saying that every other reading says that. I'm not saying it supports a Triadic Declaration. And the thing is, I don't think you're actually qualified to say whether it supports a Triadic Declaration or not. Because, obviously I've gone through your research here. You're wrong on God and Lord. Your friend at the Smithsonian, who's this world-leading scholar, was wrong. I can figure that out. Anyone who just does a little bit of research into what you're claiming can prove you wrong. And so how come all of a sudden, you've got these experts around you who've said these things, and I've proven them wrong? How come you're not like, oh, wow, that guy can't be trusted again? But maybe he's not a good scholar, or maybe I got it wrong. No, you're not going to say that. You're just going to throw sand in the air and make this about something else, create a straw man argument elsewhere, and then try and discredit that. And it's like, just deal with what I've actually said in the book. Just deal with what I've actually said face to face. Deal with what I've said online. I've clearly gone through these things many, many times. And you're like, oh, you're saying it over and over again. And it's like, well, that's because you're not listening. And what I find is that you have a certain stubbornness about you, that you have pride. And, you've become sort of like the Bill Nye science guy on this issue, where you don't really know that much about it. And you're fudging your way through this debate. And I'm like, okay, well, you said this wrong, you said this wrong, you said this wrong. And it's just getting to the point where there's like, I'm tired of doing videos coming against you that are clearly showing how wrong you are. I'm getting bored of it. But the thing is, because you repeated these things in the James White, TR discussion, and you repeat it in other places, I have to deal with this. And someone has to say, Stephen Boyce, you need to just deal with what people are dealing with. You need to not lie, not say that I'm saying this is a Triadic Declaration issue in the Ethiopic. I've never said that. And so please stop saying that. Please turn around and, an apology would be good. I was willing to apologise if I've ever done it. You're not willing to apologise no matter what evidence is shown to you. And that's called pride. You've got to be teachable. If you want to be an apologist, if you want to be this world-leading apologist, you need to humble yourself and you need to accept correction. On these basic things, you should be able to say, okay, well, if I really want to clearly represent Nick, he didn't actually mention that this is part of the Triadic Declaration in his book. He's never said it anywhere. I've just sort of assumed that that's what he said and thought I nailed him in a debate point, but he's actually never said that, so I should clarify my points a little bit clearer. But you're not doing that. You're just doubling down and saying, and then basically sort of making out that, because I'm making these videos, I'm coming against you. I'm not coming against you. I'm coming against what you're saying because it's wrong. I've studied this issue for years and years and years, and you just come along and just say all this rubbish about it, and I'm just showing people that what you're saying is wrong. So then Stephen said, and to be clear, Hoskia places the reading in defence of my position for Holy One. Hickson and Kranz firmly disagree with your overall position. I know that. Don't quote them as if they are making a case for your argument there, because they all recognise the massive evidence against your conclusion. So here we have, he's changed the goalposts once again. Instead of just dealing with the Ethiopic, and all I said was, Hickson and Kranz and these other guys are in agreement with that. That's what the Ethiopic is reading. It's reading, the future form. It's reading shalt be, esomenos in the Ethiopic. Now he's like, no, these guys don't agree with your final conclusion, so don't mention them. And it's like, I never said that they agree with my final conclusion. So why would you bring that up? Why are you sort of saying that I can't, there's plenty of scholars who, you probably don't agree with. You've said you follow Bart Ehrman and, some of his conclusions on the Pericope Adulterae and things like that. And, surely we none of us have someone we look up to and say everything they've said is correct. And, obviously Hickson says things are right and things that are wrong. So does Kranz. But on this issue, they're in agreement that the ether, you agree with it. So that's what I'm trying to say. You agree with it. These guys agree with it. And then you're like, don't even bring these guys up. They don't agree with your final argumentation. So I said, Stephen Boyce, I am simply stating that I have always claimed that the Ethiopic reads shalt be. And it obviously does. So that's all that I was saying. You are now claiming that it's the entire Triadic Declaration, which I have never claimed. Hickson and Kranz not only agree with me on this, so on what I've written, that it's, shall be, but Kranz, Riddle, the TBS, Trinitarian Bible Society guy, and your Ethiopic scholar friend all conclude that Beza did in fact have an ancient manuscript and he used for the reading. So your claims of conjecture and harmonization have become an error also according to them. So I made quite a few points there, but I've just basically said, that's all I'm saying. Why are you going off on all these tangents? And he said, Nick Sayers, you read what you want to read. I'm done arguing with you. Hickson would throw up if he read that. You fantasized their statements and totally misunderstood what they were saying, just as you misread the statement of my friend's translation of the annotation. So it's like, here's Elijah Hickson. He would read what I said. And clearly what I'm saying here in context is that the shall be reading is in the Ethiopic. I'm not talking about any other reading. I made that very clear. And he's like, Elijah Hickson would throw up at that. And you're reading what you want to read. And just, it's like he's just become unhinged. And it's like, I usually block people who become like this. But it's like, well, this is, one of the go-to gurus nowadays of, which texts. And this guy's a pastor, and he's behaving like this. Since I'm friends with Elijah Hickson, I asked him to validate your statement. He said, I said that where the Latin translation says et eris, the Latin translation really does say et eris, followed by a bunch of stuff about how horrible the translator was. He said he never affirmed Beza having an ancient manuscript on hand. So that's two people you've misrepresented so far. Again, you read what you want to read and then call us irrational. No, we get annoyed with being misrepresented. And so, okay, so if you go to Elijah Hickson's blog, he basically puts the argument for Revelation 16:5 in the Ethiopic, and then he asks for experts to talk about it. Jan Kranz gets on there and a bunch of other guys, and they chat about it, and they come to a conclusion. They come to conclusions, and Jan Kranz, if you go to Munster's website, if you look at his conjectural emendation there, he clearly has written what it is and his conclusions on that. And so here it is on the screen. You can clearly see this is what Jan Kranz concluded from Elijah Hickson's study. So he's actually contacted Elijah Hickson and said that I'm claiming that he's saying there's an ancient manuscript for this. And I've never said that. And so if we just go back to what I've said just above, where, he lost his mind and said, that he was going to throw up, I clearly said that Hickson, Kranz, Hoskett, and many others agree with the et eris reading, read with their Somenos reading in the Ethiopic. So now I'm saying that, and now he's like, oh, so you're saying that Elijah Hickson is claiming there's a manuscript that Beza followed. It's a totally separate issue. And like I'm saying, he just has created a straw man, and he's gotten someone else involved in this. So you can see why I've been frustrated with this guy for a long time. And, I question someone when, I can understand in the heat of a Facebook debate, you can get frustrated and he might have been answering this in the middle of the night. I always give the benefit of the doubt, but he just seems to be like, no, you're wrong, you're misrepresenting, you're lying about people. And he's just giving me absolutely no wiggle room here to defend myself from what I've never said, which he accused me of in the debate. And I'm like, well, actually, your friends agree with it. He's like, don't mention my friends. And it's like, but they're saying this about the ending part. So, no, you're saying now that they're saying about Beza and the manuscript. I'm like, no, I brought up two issues here. Don't conflate them. And so this is the sort of thing I've been dealing with. And so no wonder he's saying Elijah Hickson would throw up at me saying that. Because Stephen Boyce is not reading what I've said. And it's clear for anyone who wants to go through those Facebook threads to see what I've actually written. And so I'm just going to read through something that I wrote after that, because I was just gobsmacked that he was just going in all these different directions. And it's like, it's not that I haven't nailed this guy down. It's just that he just is being nailed down and he's just there lying about it. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And so I said, Stephen Boyce, I said, that's okay. It seems you're in damage control and you're not reading what I said properly and are claiming that I said things I did not. When a simple conversation starts to go south like this, with constant claims on misrepresenting people deliberately, it makes more sense to place all of the info into a clear, uncluttered format so that folks can evaluate exactly what I said and not what you're claiming I said. I'll be making a video about your accusations of me here and probably writing a new chapter on this information for my book. Specifically about your claims in the debate, so obviously I'm typing on Facebook, right through to this thread here, and how you've attempted to mix the basic issues that I've claimed, that I said that the Ethiopic had the Triadic Declaration, and now that I claim that Hickson thinks, I said Beza had an ancient manuscript. So obviously I've got a typo there. I didn't say and you misread. I didn't say that and you misread. I was specifically examine and compare the writings of the 4 people who retranslated the annotations. I never said Hickson agreed with me or them, but rather agreed with the Eris reading in the Latin, and how I am just clearly stating what the annotations say. I take all accusations against me with the utmost seriousness, and will make this my main focus to prove my innocence against your claims that I am deliberately misrepresenting people. Id est lying. You're calling me a liar. And we'll put all other projects on hold until this is resolved. And so that was back just after the debate. And so I've seen Stephen, go off and do a whole bunch of other stuff with James White and a whole bunch of other things, and repeat similar things. And so that's, I can understand if he went through this and read it and went, okay, well, I've made a few mistakes. But he's repeating this. He's believing the garbage that's coming out of his mouth. He's believing.
You've made statements about the Ethiopic or the Ge'ez language supporting this from the 1549. And you wrote that in your book, and I think you took a picture of Hoskier's citation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Walton's polyglot.
Right. I have a connection at the Smithsonian who connected me with one of the leading professionals in the world in the Ge'ez language, Dr. Natsnitzen, and I hope I just did justice to his name because I don't know how to pronounce German names. And what he did for me, Nick, and I'll pull this up for us, is he translated the Ethiopic out of the polyglot itself. And what you said was true. In one place, in your argument, you say that who will be is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that. I'd like to state this. He made statements that these transmissions into the Ethiopic were very poorly done, a lot of misspellings and so forth. But I noticed that there was something missing even in the Ethiopic that was translated in the Latin. There is who is and who will be, but there is no who was. The Triadic Declaration is not even in the Ethiopic. And it's not based on anything like what we're suggesting Beza said about Jehovah. In fact, the word over here is actually God. Though it is a sacred name, Theos would be a sacred name, it is not Jehovah name on Korea. So even in the Ethiopic translation here. So what happened and I want you to chime in on this, Nick, I'll give you a lot of time to explain. You come down here into Hoskier's edition of citations. And by the way, all the support says Hosios right here. Here's all the support. Here's the translation of Dudley. You are righteous. And then he has Lord here. He mistranslated the Ethiopic. Should have been God. And rectus right here. And then you're right about this part. This right here, Dick shows that this is the Ethiopic in the polyglot. You're right about this right here in your book. That is to be. But what I find interesting down here is Hoskier waited till he got to Kai Ha Hasios and the Holy One. And he cites one of the over here. This is a Coptic manuscript. And then he cites again back up here our polyglot, rectus pro sanctus ut supra. And he's letting us know that rectus replaced or went in place of sanctus, which is Holy One, ut supra. But Hoskier is saying that actually the polyglot supports Kai Ha Hasios and that the word Holy One has been replaced with a different word, rectus here. And that's understandable because if we go back to our Ethiopic over here, for some reason we have in transmission righteous and just, which doesn't really make sense to have both there. And so Dudley translated it to rectus instead of sanctus, and Hoskier recognized this should have been this is a replacement for the word Holy One, basically. And so he's saying that actually the polyglot supports Hosios. So really, according to this, the Ethiopic reads the one who is and is to be the Holy One. That's actually the reading in the Ethiopic. I'd love your feedback on that, Nick.